the jungle of South America, a bronze axe is found, a cult object from the time before Columbus, which should not be here at all. Is it possible that warriors from the Old World journeyed as far as Cuelap, the most powerful fortress in America? Relics of the legendary cloud warriors, the Chachapoya. These mummies conceal a baffling mystery.
Over the course of time, I've come across such a large amount of evidence from a wide variety of areas, which all points towards one theory: that in ancient times, people from the Old World reached Peru and joined forces with the Chachapoya.
The Phoenicians, a seafaring people, founded Carthage at the site of unique strategic importance in the Mediterranean. From here, the trading metropolis rules the center of the ancient world. With its fortress-like location and secure natural harbor, nothing can stop the nation becoming the #1 sea power. Precious resources and luxury goods arrive here from all over the world in a ceaseless flow, laying the foundation for incredible wealth. The harbor at Carthage was the gateway to the known world at that time, and sometimes even further afield. War galleys with 170 oarsmen or more set sail from here. The first of these galleys were triremes with 3 rows of oars. But then came the even more powerful ships. Thus, the Carthaginian captains dared to sail far out into the Atlantic. They ventured up the western coast of Africa as far as present-day Cameroon. From Morocco, they were able to control the trade in gold. They obtained copper from Tartessos, and the Celtic city of Corunna dominated sea routes to the north, to the Tin Miles of Cornwall in Britain. Their best warriors came from the Balearic Islands. For many years, Hans Gifhorn has studied the ancient history of the Spanish islands. He is particularly fascinated by the cultural legacy of the Phoenicians. The German professor takes a keen interest in the ancient legends, valuable sources of lost knowledge. Hans Gifhorn finds it impossible to believe that such a capable people as the Carthaginians simply vanished. When their trading empire collapsed, surely the survivors would have started a new life somewhere else. He is convinced of this. He begins his search for clues here on the Balearic Islands.
Phoenicians and Carthaginians often journeyed to Majorca, establishing trading settlements as they did in the Mediterranean and further afield.
Many thousands of Iberian soldiers fought in the Carthaginian army, which included men from various nations. The stone slingers from the Balearic Islands were considered particularly effective, forming a much-feared elite. Hard to imagine that these wild warriors and their proud generals from Carthage would have let themselves be enslaved. But what alternatives were open to them? Did they flee across the ocean to Peru? Are the dead at Cuelap the descendants of these Celts and Carthaginians, as Professor Gifhorn suggests? Carthage, the most important port of its day. The nautical skills of the Phoenicians are a key element in Gifhorn's hypothesis. The cargo port at Carthage was open to all ships, but only Carthaginian warships were allowed through the barrage gate. Behind this gate, secret boathouses had been constructed, each 6 meters wide and 30 meters long, space for 350 warships with a crew of 100,000 men. On land, too, the superpower spread fear and terror. Its war elephants were a feared weapon. So much power also provoked bitter resistance. The up-and-coming Rome soon became a dangerous rival. After 3 bloody wars, the Roman Empire was able to defeat Carthage. Hundreds of thousands died in the burning city. Countless more were enslaved, but many must have been able to flee. Professor Gifhorn believes that many of the elite warriors managed to escape. Their trail takes us to northern Spain. For 2,000 years, the Tower of Hercules at Coruña has been shining across the ocean. It was built by the Romans, based on the great Pharos of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Ever since then, the light has shone over the Atlantic. Far out over the water into the dreaded Bay of Biscay, on the sea route to America, just as was the case 2,000 years ago. When the harbour at Coruña was an important staging post for ships heading to northern shores. Here, seafarers from Carthage and throughout the Mediterranean came into contact with Celtic Iberians who had been sailing the Northern Ocean for thousands of years. Business is conducted. The riches of the country traded for precious goods from overseas, a practice that continues today among the descendants of the Celts and the Carthaginians. Trade brings the world together. Information is passed on, all the latest news. Wild rumors circulate about goods and technologies not yet known here, but earlier also about unexplored coastlines beyond the horizon. About voyages of discovery made by the sea captains of Carthage, which took them right across the Atlantic. Perhaps they even got as far as Brazil.
Even if it were theoretically possible for the Carthaginians to have reached Brazil, this doesn't indicate by any means that they really got there. More evidence will be required, and such evidence is found in the writings of ancient historians, such as Diodorus.
The Greek historian Diodorus reports in his History of the World that the Carthaginians had discovered paradise far beyond all known inhabited countries, a land with wild animals, rivers that could be navigated by ship, and high mountains. But they kept this discovery a secret. Perhaps this is where they set sail from. Carthaginian refugees and their Celtic allies from Spain.
It seems to me that without the nautical skills of the Carthaginians, it would hardly have been possible for the Celtic Iberians and the stone slingers of Majorca to cross the Atlantic.
Carthaginian sea captains perfected the nautical legacy of their Phoenician forefathers. They could ascertain their latitude by the length of the shadow cast by the midday sun. At night, they would navigate by the polar star in the constellation of the Little Bear, the star known as the Phoenician star in ancient times. As has always been the case, ships are driven by the winds and ocean currents across the Atlantic from West Africa to the northeastern coast of Brazil. Janice Jacquite has also crossed the Atlantic, entirely by herself. This woman from Heidelberg covered the 6,500 kilometers from southern Portugal to the Caribbean island of Barbados, using her own muscle power. It took her 90 days, and she used a high-tech rowing boat.
Of course, it wasn't like a lake in the park. There were some critical situations, waves up to 8 or 9 meters high, collisions or near misses with fishing trawlers, and getting caught in their nets. Naturally, the main problem is that you need fresh water and food. Of course, you're constantly exposed to the sun, the heat, but you're permanently soaking wet. Once you're in the boat, you can't turn back and row against the current, against the wind. So, in other words, you just have to make it. Even in ancient times, large boats rowed by strong men must somehow have been able to do it. Once they were on the water, they would have had to get there.
After 3 weeks on the high seas, the Carthaginian ships could have reached the tropical coastline. They would not have imagined that they had discovered a completely new world. The island of Itamaracá lies off the coast of Brazil, an ideal landing site for Carthaginians, since the islands, which are close to the coast, could be used as a base that is easy to defend. Fort Orange here dates back to the 17th century. Underneath the Dutch fortress, there are remains of an ancient Indian settlement, as indicated by ceramic fragments found here. Everywhere, curious fragments of white clay are lying around in the sand.
These are the remains of Dutch clay pipes. We found more than 5,000 of them. They certainly smoked a lot here at Fort Orange.
Up to now, the archaeologist has not found any traces of Carthaginians, and little remains of the original inhabitants. In ancient times, exhausted seafarers would have found conditions here extremely difficult after crossing the Atlantic. The archaeologist is convinced of that. The kind of dangers facing them are outlined in an account by a German mercenary. In the 16th century, Hans Staden is taken prisoner by cannibals off the coast of Brazil. He sees how these people slaughter their enemies, cut them into pieces, and then eat them. However, as well as portraying such gruesome practices, he also describes the inhabitants here as very open to trade by barter. And that was exactly the strength of the Carthaginians. Could this have been their chance of survival? There are no accounts of a transatlantic expedition to Brazil at any time before Columbus. But not far from the coast, at Rio Paraíba, there is an archaeological site which could be extremely significant, the legendary Pedra do Ingá. The rock is part of a huge natural monument. Countless figures and glyphs have been engraved into the monolith. Ever since their discovery, they have bewildered experts.
Here in Paraíba, a very long time ago, the Ataco Atará culture existed. Many engravings in stone remain from this period, such as here, of the rock of the Inga. But we don't know how these people thought, or how they behaved. We simply are not able to understand the messages they've left. How were they created? Which people immortalized themselves at the rock of the Inga? It's a mystery. However, does it seem likely that the people who did this were not simple natives? Maybe it was a completely different culture 2,000 years ago. At an early stage, local archaeologists noticed that many of the petroglyphs on the rock of the Inga displayed similarities with writing from the Old World in classical times. I've studied this. Only similarities with individual letters were found, not with complete words. However, similarities were mainly with letters from a Celtic Iberian alphabet.
4 symbols engraved on the stone resemble letters from ancient European languages. We know their phonetic value, but so far it has not been possible to translate the engravings on this Brazilian rock monument into a meaningful text. Merchants or settlers would hardly consider the parched hinterland of the Rio Paraíba a Garden of Eden, and the river itself is not navigable for very far. The tropical coastal region gives way to a desert of rock and dust. A dead end for seafarers, as any explorers would soon discover. Their only alternative would be to return to the Atlantic coast. To the northwest, there is a river of dimensions that almost beggar belief, surrounded by dense jungle, the Amazon. Tropical rainforests would hardly have been a new sight for seafarers from Carthage. They may well have seen similar vegetation in Africa. But how would the jungle have struck their Celtic allies? Fascinating? Menacing? Lurking in the green hell were the original inhabitants. In the year 1492, the unwieldy ships Christopher Columbus had for his expedition took 36 days to cover the distance from the Canary Islands to the Bahamas. This is twice as far as the shortest distance between West Africa and South America. By taking the fastest route, seafarers in ancient times could also have reached Brazil. The natives immediately spot any intruders who don't know the law of the jungle and find it difficult to master the situation, even with superior weapon technology. Thus, Spanish and Portuguese invaders had sad stories to tell when they attempted to colonize the Amazon in the 16th century. Everything is hostile, and death lurks everywhere. It could have been exactly like this 2,000 years ago, too. The first rule of survival for any stranger here is not to venture too far from the shelter of the ship. And to bring with you plenty of colourful presents for the locals, as the conquistadors did. For a tribal chief, perhaps a metal axe from a Carthaginian workshop in southern Spain would be appropriate. It is close to the Amazon Delta that the Portuguese established their first base, Belém. From here, they exploit the tropical wealth around them. With the blessing and encouragement of their god, as they announced to the wild heathens. In Belém today, archaeologists are hard at work studying Indian culture. The Goethe Institute has gathered evidence about Amazonian tribes which were neither wild nor non-religious. For thousands of years, there was a developed civilization here. Even the Brazilian cult garment, the tanga, was invented at that time, as shown by this ceramic version. Dr. Maura da Silveira is the curator of the archaeological treasures of the Amazon. Every day, objects thousands of years old are stored in her vaults. Special cult objects were made from precious materials. This valuable spearhead from rock crystal is a highlight of the collection. Terracotta idols painted in rich colours bear witness to the complex religious beliefs of the Marajoara.
This is a phallus symbol, a terracotta cult object from the Marajó. The Amazonian culture at that time was highly developed. The people lived on man-made islands that had been constructed in the marsh. It was also used as a rattle.
The very first people to excavate this area were staggered by the extraordinary finds dating back to the Marajó civilization. The funeral urns, painted in a variety of colours, are reminiscent of classical forms found in the Mediterranean. Greek vases with Celtic spiral patterns.
The Amazon basin has been settled for 11,000 years, but for a long time the population here was small. But 2,000 years ago there was a population explosion, and this growth took place extremely quickly.
In 1541, according to an eyewitness, a Spanish expedition ventured up the Amazon in search of the legendary country of gold. The chronicler reports that they were suddenly attacked. Arrows rained down upon them from the densely populated riverbank. Naked, light-skinned women were fighting in the front line of the enemy forces. It was reports about these fearless Amazons that led to the river being given its present name, although such accounts were considered untrustworthy by many. This skepticism was unfounded, as recent archaeological excavations show. In the Amazon region, there really were large settlements with thousands of inhabitants. The population was supported by lush fields of maize, tended with special agricultural techniques. The Amazon is home to the plant that will provide seeds which, as cocoa, will conquer the entire world. That the Spanish Celts ate chocolate here 2,000 years ago is pure speculation. Only now has an understanding about the flourishing Amazon civilization been rediscovered. Today, experts have no doubt whatsoever. 2,000 years ago, a cultural revolution took place there. The formal style used by artists developed in leaps and bounds. Did the impulse come from the other side of the ocean?
This special ceramic style is really fascinating. It was first developed in Marajó. Funeral urns in such a range of colours only appeared in the upper Amazon region much later than this. That's why I believe that the development began in Marajó and influenced the other regions later.
Eu acho que em Marajó essas coisas se precipitaram e certamente teve influência para outros lugares. Se costumava pensar.
It's often suggested that this new style might come from outside the region.
Ter vindo de fora essa influência.
The fact that the archaeological finds recall Mediterranean objects raises a fascinating possibility. Could seafarers have brought new ideas from the old world 2,000 years ago? Heinz Budwig is convinced that this was the case. The German-Brazilian amateur archaeologist has found more evidence, an ancient axe. As far as Budwig is concerned, this is 100% proof that foreign explorers landed in Brazil long before Columbus.